We know Donna Barton Brothers as the first person to interview the winning jockey after all Triple Crown races. But there's so much more to her story in horse racing. Today, I have the honor of personally interviewing Donna to discuss her legacy in horse racing and what awaits her in the next chapter. Thank you so much for joining me today, Donna.
It's my pleasure to be here with you, Megan. And I'm not really sure what awaits, but we can talk about it.
That's fair. So I kind of want to start at the beginning. Doing some research on you, I found out that your mother was actually a jockey back in 1969, I believe. And she was one of the top jockeys in the United States and the first one to be licensed as a jockey, female jockey. So I was wondering how that had an impact on you as you were growing up.
So my mother was one of the first half dozen women to be licensed as a female jockey. That was in 1969. And by 1970, she was the leading female jockey in the United States by races won. And it was a distinction she held throughout her career. So in 1969, I would have been 3 years old. And so this is what I grew up with, right? My mother was a jockey. My earliest memory, my mother was a jockey. And she retired in 1984. She had a career-ending riding accident. In 1984, she was racing at Fairmount Park, and she went down in a four-horse spill. She had her helmet cracked in half, so she obviously had an injury to her brain. She shattered her left jaw, broke her right collarbone in two places. It came protruding through her skin, broke her right arm in half, shattered her right hip, broke some bones in her vertebrae and in her ribs. But ultimately, she's okay right now. She's 81 years old. She lives in Louisville, Kentucky, which is where my primary home is. And so I see her quite a lot. She goes to the YMCA 3, 4, 5 days a week. She's, had a lot of work on her body. She's got a rebuilt ankle. She's got 2 hip replacements in her right hip. She's had the left shoulder completely replaced, but she's the bionic woman and she keeps going. And I would say the best way that influenced me growing up is that I often get the question, what it's like to be a woman in a man's world, right? And my first answer to that is, first of all, it's my world. It's the world that I grew up in. My little brother and my older sister, we were all on the track from really our earliest memory. Our first jobs were on the racetrack. From age like 10 on, we didn't get an allowance in the summer. So if we wanted to make money, or if we wanted to have money, we had to make money. And so you could babysit, you could mow lawns, or you could get in the car with mom every morning and go to the track. And that's what we did. We all went to the track. And so, again, it felt like it was my world. And even though my mother started well before me, if she ever did experience anything like female discrimination, she certainly never gave it a voice. I never heard her say anything like that. And so I think in her mind, she felt like if somebody wasn't riding her on their horses, it was because 1, they didn't know how good she was yet, or 2, she wasn't good enough yet. And either way, she was going to remedy that. And so when I started riding in 1987, it never occurred to me that there would be anything like discrimination against being a female. And honestly, I still don't feel that there is. There's discrimination against not being a good jockey. If you're not a good jockey, you're not going to get the opportunities. There are plenty of Latino jockeys whose English isn't great, who aren't getting the mounts that they would like to get, but you don't hear them saying, nobody rides me because I'm a Latino jockey, right? So they don't hang their hat on an excuse, and I never hung my hat on an excuse either. I felt like the opportunities were there, but you had to work for them. And I also noticed that the guys also had to work for them.
It's a really interesting parallel to how some other fields function in this world. So it's lovely that your mother gave you that example of showing that it's all about the work ethic. And if people don't think you're the best, you just try to be even better. I think that's a beautiful example that she set for you.
Yeah, absolutely. My mother always said, look, I don't care what you do for a living. I just want you to be really good at it. So whatever it is that you decide to set your sights on, make sure you're the best in your field at that, which, by the way, was one of the reasons why I didn't start riding races till I was 21. I started galloping horses in the morning when I was 17. But from 17 to 21, I'm thinking, okay, my mother is the leading female jockey in the nation. Like, I have to try to top that, right? Trying to try to be the best at it.
Yeah, that's quite an accomplishment to try to top. And when it's your mother, it's kind of a little bit harder, I could imagine.
But
So
as it stands, by the way, she won 1,201 races in her career, and I won a little over 1,100. I can't remember the exact number, but what I do know is that my mother is the winningest female jockey in our family still. Actually, the winningest jockey in our family, because my brother was a jockey for a while
mhm.
also until he outgrew it, and he didn't hit her wins total either.
What a legacy to live. She's like the Secretariat of your family. No one will reach that.
She
And that
is. She's pretty
actually leads
amazing.
into a good question on what led you to want to become a jockey? Was it seeing your mother do it and just being on the track every day? Is that what prompted you to want to be a jockey?
Not really. So I graduated from high school a year early, and I went to the track I thought I'll eventually go to college, but I'm going to go to the track first, gallop horses, take a year, figure out what I want to do. And 4.5 years later, I was still galloping horses at the track, and I had turned 21. There had been an agent. I was in Birmingham, Alabama at the time, who had been trying to get me to become a jockey. I was a naturally light rider. When I rode my first race, I weighed 98 pounds. So that wasn't a problem. But I wasn't sure I wanted to be a jockey because, to be honest, I have one brother, one sister, and one mother, and all three of them were jockeys. So when you grow up in that family, you honestly have the mindset of how hard can it be? Everybody in my family has done this, right? Well, by the time I did ride my first race in 1987, my sister married a jockey. They had 4 kids ultimately, but after she got pregnant with the second, she stopped riding. My brother rode from age 16 to 18 until he outgrew it. And then my mother had a career ending riding accident in 1984. So by 1987, I didn't have any jockeys in the family anymore. And I had a family friend who was in Kentucky and owned horses. And he asked me to come to Kentucky and train his horses privately. So I had to think, like, what am I going to do? Okay, I'm 21 years old. Galloping horses is fun, but it's a job. It's not a career. And so I really need to get serious about, am I going to go to college? Do I want to train horses? And so I thought, well, this agent, his name was Pete Antonucci, keeps saying, like, if I want to ride. So I went to Pete and said, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. What I didn't tell Pete was, this is going to be a process of elimination. I'm going to see how this works out. And if I don't like it, I may go train horses or I may go to college. And so he got me on my first mount, and I rode that first race, and I came back and my mind was blown, because not only was it the most challenging thing I had ever done in my life, it was also the most exciting thing I had ever done. I never had that many things happening all at one time, and an expectation of me to make a decision and then tell the horse what to do, right? And so the first thing that happens when the starting gate opens is literally jockeying for position. Everybody around you is jockeying for position. And if you don't also jockey for position, yours is taken before you know it, right? The next thing that happens is this dirt comes flying back with force. And so even though you have 4 or 5 pairs of goggles on, your automatic instinct is to just blink because it feels like rapidly. And then you have to tell yourself, okay, stop blinking, you have goggles on, but it still stings your face and you have to get used to that. And then you realize that your horse is expecting you to tell it what to do. Like, do we take back? Do we go forward? And so you start getting into that. And then once you start getting into that, you have to start reading the field ahead of you, see what everybody else is doing. Is there a horse in front of you that's legging in or one that's legging out? Does it look like the pace up front is going way too fast, or are they going slow? And so there's just so many things that happen all at one time that you have to figure out and then respond or react to. And then you get to a point, obviously, where you can be more proactive, where as you get to be more of a journeyman rider, you have an expectation of how things are going to shape up, an expectation of what your horse is capable of. And then you try to be the person who's making things happen instead of responding to them. And it's a long process to get from reacting to being proactive.
Mm-hmm. How did you start learning that process?
It's just a matter of experience riding races. This is one reason why jockeys have an apprenticeship, because when you first start riding, if you don't get extra weight off of your horse compared to everybody else, there's no incentive to ride you because you have no experience. And so until you've won 3 races, you have what we call a 10-pound weight allowance. So if every horse in the field is in with 118 pounds, your horse gets in with 108 pounds. And so that's a huge advantage, right? You take 10 pounds off that horse. But what you gain in getting the 10 pounds off, you lose in experience from the jockey. And so this is why we have the apprenticeship program like that. And after you've won 3 races, then you have the 7-pound bug, we call it. And it's named the bug because of that asterisk next to the weight in the program. I guess at some point somebody thought that looks like a bug. Oh, they've got the bug next to their weight. So you get the 7-pound bug, and then after you've won 40 races, that goes down to a 5-pound weight allowance. And so there is incentive for people, trainers, to give young riders a chance to ride their horses because they get the weight off. But you're learning, and you're learning for literally the first 10 years because you never have the same situation twice. There is no race that has ever run exact. And even if you took the same 8 horses and put them in the race week after week after week, that race will shape up different every single time. You're rarely on the same horse. Oftentimes you're riding a horse that you've never ridden before, never even seen before. And so there's always a learning curve, always. And I'd say it's much like anything where they say that it takes 10 years of practice to become an expert. I think it's the same way with jockeys. It takes 10 years of just practice till you start to feel like you've really got this. But it's fun. It's a fun practice.
Yeah, I can imagine. And during your time as a jockey, obviously you had a lot of experience as a jockey throughout your career, but like you said, every race is different. Even if you're riding the same horse with the same horses, it'll be different. Can you describe to me one of your favorite races as a jockey?
Oh gosh, there were so many. But I'll tell you the funnest thing is when you are coming from off the pace and you can see that the pace is collapsing in front of you and they don't even know what's coming because you have a lot of horse left, right? And so when you're turning for home and you've got horse and you have horse and you see that the 3 horses and riders in front of you are tiring, that the jockeys have already gone to the riding crop and they're not going faster, they're slowing down, and you're in a position to pounce, it's a really good feeling. And the other thing that you don't know from watching a race is that it makes sense if you think about it. If you think about a horse that's just galloping along and then a horse that's galloping a little faster or running a little faster, well, once they hit full stride, their stride lengthens. And because their stride lengthens, their body also drops. And so that's a really fun feeling when your horse hits full stride and you can feel him drop down by like 2 inches and kick into that final gear. It's a beautiful feeling, especially when you know you're about to win the race and they do it.
Absolutely, that makes it even better.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a horse that stands out to you as a jockey? Maybe one that did that for you when it dropped? But was there one horse that made an impact on you when you
Well,
were?
there were so many. I won over 1,100 races, and I think I rode over 10,000 races altogether. There were so many. Early on, there was a horse named David's Diamond. I was riding at Rockingham Park, and he was he had quite a personality. The first time that I rode him, he was a mess in the post parade. He was washed out. I mean, we're talking it's 30 degrees. We're in New Hampshire in the winter. And he's sweaty. And so I just walked him all the way to the starting gate, was just very quiet with him the whole time. And in the race, I didn't use the riding crop on him at all because he felt like he was just too sensitive for that. And he won. He won and paid whatever it was. He wasn't the favorite. So let's say he paid $10, $12. The next time he ran, the trainer stepped him up in class. If he won for 5,000 first time, now he's in for 8,000. We're not talking a big jump here. And he was a completely different horse in the post parade. He was confident. He wasn't washed out. He was just like this confident little guy. And so we turned for home, and I feel like he's going to win again, but another horse comes to him and he's not trying. And I'm afraid to use the riding crop because I noticed last time he didn't like it, but I had to use the riding crop because I wasn't going to get beat not trying. So as soon as I did that, he took off, and I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess he doesn't mind it. Anyway, long story short, I won 6 races on him going up the ladder, and he would go back and forth between those 2 personalities every race. So the third time I rode him, he showed up and he was completely washed out, nervous, I couldn't use the riding. So he was an interesting little individual, and he taught me a lot. I had the apprenticeship at the time. We were at Rockingham Park, and I was riding a lot of horses there, but I did have the bug, and so I was learning. And then, yeah, so many horses. There was a filly I rode in Minnesota named Hoister Flag. She was my first consistent stakes winner, and she just ran for me. And one of the things that my mother used to say is that the hardest thing to get a jockey to do is nothing. And she was a filly, or a mare, actually. She was, I think, 5, who wanted you to do nothing. She wanted you to just sit still and let her do the running and don't bother her. And she would run very fast that way. But as soon as a jockey would start telling her what to do or even pull out the riding crop, she would be like, I'm done. We either do it my way or we don't do it, right? And so I liked her because she ran faster for me than she did other riders, but other riders didn't know why. They didn't know that it was because I did nothing and you're trying to do everything.
Right.
And so she taught me a lot too about, just paying attention to what horses like, don't like, will tolerate, will run better from. And then, of course, I had so many great horses that I rode for G. Wayne Lucas later in my career. The list is long, but Serena Song and Hennessy and Lord Carson, Lost Pan. Just so many nice horses that also every horse, if you're paying attention, teaches you something along the way.
Absolutely. And I have in my notes here that you retired as the second leading female jockey with over 18 million purse winnings. So after such an incredible career like that, what led you to make the decision to retire as a jockey?
Well, that's a good question because I was young when I retired. I was only 32 and I'd been riding for 11 and a half years. And I don't think anybody expected me to retire when I did. But this is a game of peaks and valleys. So in horse racing, you're going to have highs and lows no matter who you are. You can look at any jockey. That's Joel Rosario, who's won the Kentucky Derby. He just shifted his tack out to California because he's trying to get, more mounts, more business. He's trying to drum up business. So there's so many, that's just the nature of this game. And at that time, when I decided to retire, I was in what we would call a valley. And I knew how hard I'd have to work to get back out of it. Simultaneously, my longtime boyfriend at that time was Frank Brothers, who was a horse trainer. And we had dated for about 5 years, but we hadn't had any desire to get married. One, we didn't want kids. And two, there's this conflict of interest rule in racing, at least in Kentucky and New York, where anytime a trainer runs a horse in a race, if their husband or wife is a jockey, their husband or wife has to ride that horse or they can't ride the race. And so obviously we didn't get married because why would I put myself in that sort of a situation when I'm riding for Wayne Lucas? And his main rider was Shane Sellers at the time. I rode some of his horses, my husband's, Frank Brothers. But in any event, he was getting ready to go to New Orleans for the winter and he wanted me to go. And I was like, my business is not going to warrant a trip to New Orleans this winter. I'm going to be in a rebuilding phase here at Turfway Park over the winter. And then I just decided, you know what? I don't feel like doing it. Like it's going to take a lot of work. And to be honest, I was going through a little PTSD, which does happen with jockeys. And by that, I mean that there would be situations where I was riding a race and suddenly I would feel like my horse disappeared. And then a second later, I would realize, no, we're still here. My horse didn't fall. Like the race is still happening. And you can also get over that. Like it's just one of those things where it's just like if you almost get into a car crash for the next, month, maybe. Every car that's coming from the right, you feel like you're ready to brace for it, right? Because you're afraid that it's going to hit you. And so that does happen. It's a dangerous occupation. So there were a couple of things, right, all happening at the same time. And also I was ready to marry Frank Brothers and live happily ever after. And so that's all I had in mind. Okay, we'll get married. We'll go to New Orleans for the winter. I'll get on horses for you. And then, we'll just do this happily ever after thing. And then Brian Krantz, who owned the fairgrounds at the time, called me and asked me if I would join their broadcast team and just interview the winning connections after the stakes races only on weekends, just for their in-house feed. And I thought, well, that would be a nice, easy way to get started in television if I think I might want to do that. So I did that. And then when we came back up to Churchill Downs in the spring, John Asher, who had been promoted to vice president, he had been doing the racing analysis with Mike Battaglia. John Asher would be in the paddock and Mike Battaglia would be in the studio. They're on the track, but he was in the studio. And so John asked me if I wanted to take a shot at doing the racing analysis from the paddock. And I thought, sure, why not? So, for a while there, I was galloping horses every morning and then doing these other jobs in the afternoon. And it kept me very busy. And then in 2000, the spring of 2000, NBC came to Churchill Downs because they were getting the Kentucky Derby the following year in 2001. ABC still had it that year. And they watched me doing the in-house television commentary. Unbeknownst to me, they were looking for a reporter on horseback. And I'm really glad that my colleague, Mike Battaglia, who I was working with, didn't tell me because he knew. And Tom Hammond, who ended up being one of my colleagues at NBC, also knew. And they had both told the NBC execs to watch me and what I do on air, and that, of course, I could ride. I'm a former jockey. And so before they left that weekend, they asked me if I'd join their broadcast team. So yeah, it was, again, we talked about this before we came on. You put yourself in a position for luck to run over you, right? So was there luck involved? Absolutely. But had there been a lot of preparation that took me to that point? Yes, to that also.
I think that's a beautiful, beautiful way to describe it, because it did. It just happened to you. And your reputation as a jockey preceded you. And I'm sure that that's what inspired people to go, this can be the woman that we want in the paddock commentating on these races. And now look at you. You had 26 years being the on-track racing analyst and commentator for NBC. And obviously you experienced a lot. There were so many Triple Crown hopefuls. We finally got 2 Triple Crowns with American Pharoah and Justify. But within those 26 years at NBC, what was one of your favorite moments as an on-track commentator?
Yeah, well, first of all, I never thought I'd be there for 26 years. I mean, that's like almost your whole lifetime, maybe more than your whole lifetime, right? So who would have thought I would be there 26 years later? I would say, when I look back at the moments, there's special moments, one-on-one with different jockeys. Calvin Burrell comes to mind, some of the interviews with him. But the two that probably meant the most to me just to have been there for them was the Triple Crown. So to be there for American Pharoah, to be the first horse to win the Triple Crown in 37 years. You've done a story about American Pharoah, what an incredible horse he was. And he's been a very good sire also. So that was so much fun to be able to, have in my memory bank the interview after the Derby, after the Preakness, after the Belmont Stakes, that whole run. And then fast forward to the Breeders' Cup that year, he became the first horse to win the Triple Crown and then go on to win the Breeders' Cup Classic. Of course, he was the first horse in position to do that because we hadn't had a Triple Crown winner since the 70s, and the Breeders' Cup started in 1984. But he still did it. He was the first horse to do it, and to date, the only horse to do it. So that was a lot of fun. And then, of course, Justify came along 3 years later. He was ridden by a really good friend of mine, Mike Smith. When I came to Minnesota in 1988 with the Bug, Mike Smith was a journeyman rider there. And we became friends, and he really sort of took me under his wing and would watch races with me, tell me what I could do better, yell at me sometimes, because what were you even thinking there? But we need that, right? Mm-hmm. So it was fun I felt like I got to share that moment with him when he won the Triple Crown. And what a fun moment to be able to share with your friend right there after it happens.
Absolutely. I think that's a detail that none of us would have known had you not just shared it. And it just makes thinking about that moment in that interview even more special.
Yeah.
As an on-track racing commentator, you obviously see so many things, both the post-parade and then once the horses are done with the race. What are things that you would look for when you were in that role before the race was going on, during the race? What were things that stood out to you?
Well, as the producer often reminds the people out in the field, we are the eyes and ears out in the field. They don't have the ability to have a camera everywhere. And certainly that's the case on the racetrack. So there'll be times when I'll say to my associate producer, Amy Zimmerman is in the truck also. The last few years, our lead producer for the Derby. Breeders' Cup has been Lindsay Schanzer. And so I always have the ear of Amy Zimmerman, who's in the truck. And so I might say, hey, are you seeing what's happening with this horse right now? Like, is there a camera on it? And she'll either say yes or no. And then if the answer is no, I'll say, well, try to get a camera on so-and-so. He's near the starting gate. They're resetting the saddle on him, blah, blah, blah. So, I try to make sure that they are catching all the action worth note out on the track. But then also I put myself in a position to report on those sort of things as well. So there'll be times when, like the case right behind the starting gate, when Great White flipped over right before the Kentucky Derby. And the first thing that I hear in my ear was Amy saying, Donna, can you do a report on this? And I said, absolutely. And so, we out in the field, I say we, meaning, even the other the other talent who are maybe standing up in the viewing area, they might be like, oh, did you just get on camera that this just happened, that Chad Brown just hugged Bob Baffert or whatever, And so we always have our eyes peeled, but I am the only one on the racetrack in a position to do that. So I try to make sure I catch it all, right? Like I am constantly watching the horses in the warm up to see if there's anything unusual. In the Breeders' Cup last year, when the Bets scratched White Barrio, I was standing right there and I could see exactly how that was unfolding. And I said to Amy, I think they're getting ready to scratch this horse. And she said, can you do a report on it? Absolutely. And so it's just a matter of making sure that you're paying attention to everything that's happening all the time. And you know what? I would say 98 times out of 100, there's nothing happening.
Right.
So,
Right.
so sometimes you feel like, why am I doing this? But then it pays off because when something like what happened with Great White behind the starting gate happens, they need for you to report on that.
Absolutely. And then, of course, you have all of the jockeys that are in the field. The race starts, it ends, and you don't know who the winning jockey will be. So would you please describe your process of once the jockey and horse win that race, how do you approach interviewing the winning jockey?
Well, it happens long before that. So there's a big difference between research and preparation. And so research is making sure that you've done all the research, the stats, that it's, that Jose Ortiz has ridden 10 Kentucky Derbies and he hasn't won one yet. That's research. But preparation is, what are we going to talk about if he does win? And so you have to start to get those things into your head. And so in Jose's case, you already know exactly what happened because you saw the interview after he won the Kentucky Derby. So I'll give you a different example. So in John Velasquez's case, he's in the Hall of Fame. He doesn't tend to get very emotional after a big win. And so I have to think, like, what would make this special to John if he were to win the Kentucky Derby? He's already won 3 Kentucky Derbies. And so in my mind, that goes, oh, wait, but for 3 different trainers. And so in today's riding for Brad Cox. So then the only note that I'll have in my program is Graham Motion, Bob Baffert, Todd Pletcher, and then circle Cox, right? So that I can say to him, like, you're in the Hall of Fame, you've been riding this many years, you've won this many races, your 4th Kentucky Derby win. But Johnny, for a 4th different top trainer in the United States, what does it mean to you to get to this point in your career? Some would say the twilight of your career, and you still have top trainers in the United States who go to you first. So you put yourself in a position to be able to ask him a question that is unique to him. And then when you do that, they feel seen right away. They feel like, wow, she knows my whole story, right? And so they feel like they can talk to you. And that's when it becomes conversational. That's when you're in a conversation with this person who just had maybe the biggest win, maybe the best moment of their life to date. And they already feel like they're seen by you because the first question was unique to them and them alone. And then the conversation just unfolds. The other stuff, you just kind of know. Like, I wouldn't have had, in my program notes for the Kentucky Derby, I didn't have a second question for John Velasquez. That was going to be the opener. And then we were going to see where that took us. But I knew that it was the first time that he had ever ridden Further Ado. I knew a lot of things about his relationship with Brad Cox, having ridden for Brad, which wasn't lengthy. He hadn't ridden a lot for him. So, we could have definitely carried on that conversation, but it would have been based on how Johnny answered that first question And then the knowledge that I had about, everything else, the horse, the trainer, the jockey, all of that.
Mm-hmm. And to your point, I do think, because I've watched you my whole life being the on track racing commentator, and I think you always did a wonderful job with making the jockey feel seen and feel appreciated for what they accomplished. But if you, as a winning jockey, were to be asked a question from someone like you, what would you want that question to be after you win a race?
Well, it's got to be specific to that race, right? And so,
Mm-hmm.
like back when I rode a lot for Wayne Lucas, if I had won a Breeders' Cup race, I finished second, got beat ahead on Hennessy in the 1995 Breeders' Cup Juvenile. And so I would say, at that point, I was still a fairly young rider. I have a little buddy here with me, by the way. He just turned 10 yesterday.
Oh,
His
happy
name's Jackson.
birthday.
But in any event, so I was still a fairly young rider, and Wayne Lucas had been very pivotal to my career. So the question probably would need to revolve around the fact that Wayne Lucas believed in me enough to ride Hennessy in that race. And what does it mean to you for him to have that faith in you? And then also just the horse himself, because that horse had run his best races for me. Gary Stevens had ridden him, Pat Day had ridden him. But if you believe in the Beyer speed figures and you looked at those closely, you would see that all of his highest Beyer numbers were with me on him. And so the next question would be, this horse's best races have been with you on him. What is it about you and this horse that just seems to click? So that's how, like, you just zone in on, like, it's never specific to a time. It's never general. So that question that I mentioned about John Velasquez, if he had won the Kentucky Derby, wouldn't work for the Preakness. It wouldn't work for the Belmont Stakes. It wouldn't work for the Travers this summer. So they always have to be specific to where they are at that point in time and their relationship to this trainer, this horse, these connections.
That's really great insight. Um, so aside from the Triple Crown races and the Travers and the Breeders' Cup, you also have, I'm going to double check my notes to make sure because you have quite the extensive history as a broadcast commentator. You also work on the World Equestrian Games, PBR, which is Pro Bull Riding, World Championships, and the Kentucky Land Rover Rolex 3-day event. So how did you approach those other equine-based events differently than you did, or the same, the Triple Crown races?
Well, that's more sideline reporting, and the Triple Crown races is sideline reporting. I just happen to be on horseback, but there's a lot more sideline reporting involved with the show jumping and the World Equestrian Games. The World Equestrian Games took me to Aachen, Germany in 2006. And then that was our preparation for hosting it at the Kentucky Horse Park in 2010, when NBC also covered it. And so in 2006, when we went, our production was a smaller scale. I think we were just trying to figure out what it was that we were dealing with. And so while we did cover every event, I only interviewed the winning connections afterwards, right? So like we would get over there for the final, and it wasn't one of those things where I had the bandwidth or the wherewithal, or a research team for that matter. I didn't even have a research team where I could really get into that person. So the only thing I could really get into was the horse. And so like Zara Tisdale, when she won the eventing in the Aachen Games, World Equestrian Games, like I can't remember her horse's name now. It was 20 some years ago. But I remember saying to her, because I didn't know a lot about the horse and I didn't know a lot about her history with eventing and the World Equestrian Games. So I just said, look, we can tell from watching your horse that he's brave and also that he has great stamina. But what can you tell us about him that you can't tell from watching him? As a rider, what can you tell us about a personality trait or his personality that you can't tell from watching him? And the reason why I say that is because you're a horse girl, Megan, and we know that people love to talk about their horses, right? And she loves this horse, and that was plain as day. And so if I just set it up and give her a question that's going to allow her to talk about whatever it is that she loves most about this horse, it's probably going to be a pretty good interview. And it was a good interview because I put her in a position to talk about something she loved to talk about. Notice I didn't ask her her strategy. You know, I didn't say like, the final phase in eventing is the show jumping. And so I'm never going to start with, can you tell me what your strategy was and did it go as planned? Because now you're immediately just talking about everything that was in your head and you've lost the emotional tie to the victory. And so I try to ask a question that's going to keep them in their heart zone instead of their head zone.
Absolutely. And I remember from one of our previous interviews, you discussed Authentic winning the Kentucky Derby and winning eventually the Breeders' Cup, and how you have a personal connection to him because of your position within, I believe, just double checking to make sure I get the name right, it is Starlight and Star Ladies Racing. And I remember you talking about how, as a reporter, you want to be excited that the horse that you wanted to win also won, but you also had to, you know, monitor that emotion if the horse didn't win. So,
well, there was an added connection. My husband at the time was bloodstock agent for Starlight Racing, and he picked out Authentic. So he was part of the team that chose Authentic for that year's yearlings, for that year's yearling crop. And so I was happy for my husband, probably more than anything, because he finally got his Kentucky Derby winner. He had been a trainer for a number of years. He trained Hansel, who won the 1991 Preakness and Belmont Stakes, but he was the favorite for that year's Kentucky Derby, and he just didn't show up. He didn't fire. I think, finished like 9th or something in the Derby, but he came back out of the race well, and so he ran him in the Preakness, and he won the next 2 legs of the Triple Crown. So it was fulfilling to see him finally get his Kentucky Derby winner, and then later he won the Breeders' Cup Classic. So it was pretty exciting. But yes, like you said, there are times whenever I have emotions around a certain event that I just have to reel in, because the story isn't about me and how I feel about it. The story is about this jockey and how they feel about it.
Mm-hmm. And how did you help yourself do that? I'm sure it kind of ties into your previous response on how you want the jockey to be feeling like he's seen, or she. We'd love a she to win one of those Triple Crown races someday. But how did you do that to make sure that you were always putting that jockey first and putting your emotions second?
Well, it wasn't hard because I had been a jockey. And as a jockey, you certainly have emotions that aren't always appropriate to share. And, you know, for example, like let's say that you ride a horse that it's the 3rd race in a row that the trainers run it over its head. And at this point, the horse is losing confidence. And you can't come back and say, you're a moron and this horse, you're making it mentally go in the wrong direction. And if you don't find a better race for him to run in, he's going to have no confidence left to run with. So my emotion after that race might be one thing, but what I'm going to come back and say is he's doing the very best he can. That is all he's capable of. And then I hope from that they'll be able to extrapolate, we need to find an easier spot for him, right? And so you get a lot of training as a jockey to be diplomatic in the way you say things, even though you may have strong emotions behind what it is that you're saying. And also, you know, there were times when I was a jockey when some of those defeats hurt worse than others, but I can't cry in front of the owner or the trainer. I can't in my fellow jockeys. So, you know, you go back into the jocks room with your chin up and you take it on the chin, as they say. And maybe when I'm washing my face off to get ready for the next race, there might be some tears left behind in that bucket that nobody sees, but nobody's going to see me cry. That's for sure. And so I had a lot of training, having been a jockey, of reeling in my emotions and making sure that, you know, what I did was proper.
Mm-hmm. I always think you handled every single race with grace and poise, and it's wonderful to see that that came from your training as a jockey. But now you've retired, and I'm sure that we're going to definitely feel your loss with you not being the on-track racing reporter. For me, I don't know how I'm going to handle it going, oh, it's not Donna on the track anymore, but I'm sure they're going to have someone wonderful coming in. But I also know that aside from your work as an on-track racing analyst and as a jockey, you are also very passionate about giving back to your community. And from going to reference the notes one more time. Um, from what your website describes, it's you have a passion for advocating for thoroughbred aftercare. Would you describe what led you to want to be an advocate for this?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. And Andy Biancone, who is a young racing analyst who does horse racing coverage for FanDuel TV, will be the person to take over what I do. And you will miss me for 3 minutes, and then you'll fall in love with Andy Biancone because she is wonderful. The energy, the passion, the enthusiasm that she brings to the game. Her father is a horse trainer. She's been galloping horses since a young age, been around the barn from a young age. She's engaged to Keith Asmussen, that's trainer Steve Asmussen's son. They're going to get married this summer. And so she's deeply immersed in the sport, and she's young. And the thing that I love about Andy is her connection with so many people in the backside. Like I told my producers already that no, Andy Biancone is not a former jockey, but the jockeys all know her very well and respect her. And she knows more about the stories and the people on the backside than I've ever known. And so I think she's going to bring a new aspect to the broadcast. So moving on from there, I think you will, again, miss me for all of about maybe 30 seconds. So the thoroughbred aftercare, you know, Megan, I've had an existential crisis about 5 years into covering horse racing on TV. And I thought, like, it's not like I'm, saving people's lives or feeding starving children. I mean, what I do is nothing. It's entertainment. And then I realized, okay, entertainment's not nothing. People have hard lives, and it's nice for them to be able to get away. And if while we're covering a horse race, we can entertain, we can inform, we can inspire in some way, then that's not nothing. People need to have some sort of an outlet. And if you can inspire people while they're in that outlet, then you're doing something. But even beyond that, it does give us a platform, right, to be able to showcase the things that are important to us. And I've always felt like in thoroughbred racing that we're going to be judged by the way we treat our horses, but more after they are use to us than while they are of use to us. And so if we just discard them once they can no longer race, then who are we, right? Like, how can we say we love horses and then that's what we do? And most people in the sport would never do that. But the fact remains that not every horse thoroughbred has had a soft landing after they're done racing. And so the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance started in 2013, and their two primary goals are, number one, to accredit aftercare organizations. Prior to them, there was no accreditation, so you didn't really know if you were donating to an aftercare organization, how the money was being spent. The second thing that they do, the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance, is that they're a fundraising body for aftercare organizations. Now, they don't raise all the money that these organizations need, but they do try to raise a nice portion of it. And so they apply for grants. I think right now we have 83 accredited organizations that are getting grant money from the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance. And you're nice to have my book right behind, over your right shoulder, to the left of the screen. 100% of the proceeds of that book go to the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance because, I wrote that book in 2010. The updated edition is now, I think it's on its 4th edition. Keep in mind, when I first wrote the book in 2010, we didn't have a Triple Crown winner. And then when I updated it, thank goodness I waited until, I think it was 2019 before I did the next update, because then we had 2 Triple Crown winners right there back to back. And so it's required some updates over the years. But in any event, I wrote the book because I felt like there needed to be a book that explained horse racing, because it can be a complicated sport. And so all of the chapters in there are standalone chapters. If you don't care about where jockeys come from, don't read that chapter. If you want to know how to bet on a race and how to choose your horse, read that chapter. But I got to where I didn't really want to talk about the book that much because I didn't want people to think that I was trying to pad my pockets on the backs of horses again, right? And then once I decided, if I donate 100% of the proceeds to the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance, then it's a win-win for the book. Everybody wins. You recommend it, you buy it for your friends, and the horses win. And we also teach people about the sport that we love.
I think that's very important, especially when we have the controversies that surround the sport, the illegal drugging, the racetrack fatalities, and sometimes that's all the mainstream media shows. So people who are outside of the sport, that's all they get to see. So I think it's wonderful that you have a resource for people to be able to understand there's so much more to the sport than the headline news that the mainstream media puts out there. And what better way to describe it than from a jockey and a person who's on the track and sees it firsthand and whose blood is literally in the sport with your mom, your brother, and your sister. And
well, our producer used to always have the saying, and he would remind us before every show, remember, it's a broadcast, not a narrow cast. So make sure that you're using broad, understandable terminology.
right, everyone must understand it.
Yeah.
So now you have your book, you've hung up your microphone, I'll say it that way. What's next for you? And I know as someone who's been asked that question a lot, sometimes it's not an easy question to answer because you might just be figuring it out. But if you could, what do you think is next for you? And will it be, it's a double barreled question, will it be still somewhere in horse racing?
Well, we're in Saratoga Springs for the summer. We just got up here. We drove up actually on Memorial Day, and the Belmont Stakes is this coming weekend. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but I will not be going to the track. I'm going to watch the Belmont Stakes from home. And you know what I look forward to? I haven't even read, there's 6 grade ones on the card that day, and I haven't read about any of them because I'm going to sit on my couch and I'm going to let the Fox Sports team tell me about who I should be watching in this race and why. So number one, my first goal, Megan, is to not spend 5 or 6 hours a day on the computer doing all the research that I've done for so many years, since I've been covering horse racing for NBC, because I've always covered the biggest events, the Kentucky Derby and the Breeders' Cup. And if you don't follow horse racing all year long in the lead up to the Breeders' Cup and then all spring in the lead up to the Kentucky Derby, you can't just catch up like 2 weeks before the Derby and just jump in. So if you're not doing it all year long, then you're already behind before you start. And so I've spent 5 or 6 hours a day in front of this computer for well over 20 years, and I am ready to stop doing that. The next thing I'm going to do is get grounded in nature. So you'll probably find me out walking trails or, hiking up in the Adirondacks, riding my bike, stand-up paddleboarding, way more often than you'll find me at the racetrack. And then after that, we'll see. My first thing is to just recalibrate in nature and see if I want to do anything. My husband's been retired since 2022. He's going to be 80 in October, and he's doing very well. But, I want to hang out with my husband some and just enjoy life a bit. If I get bored and decide, okay, I need something else, then I'll make some decisions. But for right now, I'd like to get to a point where I'm bored. It hasn't happened in 30 years.
Right. And I know you also love to read. Is there a book on your reading list that you want to get to that maybe you haven't yet because of all the research and how busy you've been?
Yeah, well, Tom Durkin's book just came out. It was released on May 28th. Oh gosh, I've got the book right here behind me. I can't think of the name of it, but I've got it. A Life's Calling is the name of his book. And yeah, I'm going to start reading that probably this afternoon. But I am a big reader. I am incessantly reading a book. I listen to a lot of them on Audible. So I almost always have a book going. Well, I shouldn't say almost always. I always have a book on Audible going and a book that I'm also reading because I find it very relaxing to read at night before I go to bed. So I always have something that I'm reading. But yeah, I'm looking forward to Tom Durkin's book.
That's so exciting. I had no idea he just released one. I'll have to check that one out.
He did. And again, I'm up in Saratoga and he's doing a book signing tonight at the Racing Museum. So I'm going to go get my book signed by him.
Oh, how fun.
Yes.
There's one question that I always like to ask anyone that I interview. And
pancakes. It's pancakes. That's my favorite. I'm kidding.
Absolutely. Yes, I love them with the chocolate chips. You add chocolate to yours.
No. I just like a little bit of fruit, a little bit of maple syrup, and a little bit of yogurt. But anyway, that's not really the question you asked.
I wish it was. It's a good one. The last question I have, is there any question that you wish that I asked you and anything that you would like to say that you haven't already?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because my husband and I were having dinner a couple nights ago here in Saratoga Springs. We were sitting at the bar at Salevo, and they had Louisiana Downs was a track that they were showing in Mountaineer Park. And we started talking about how we got started. I first met my husband at Louisiana Downs. I was 18 years old. He was the leading trainer there. And we just started talking about all the work at first, like, just the years and years of just really working hard. And I think that's one thing that people may not understand is that, they see Cherie DeVoe just won the Kentucky Derby, and they see the Ortiz brothers who are at the top of the game, and everybody wants that. But I don't know if they know the amount of work that it takes to get there. Cherie DeVoe was an assistant trainer for two different trainers for 13 years before she went out on her own. She trained horses for almost a year before she won her first race. And so, everything that you saw happen to her on Kentucky Derby Day didn't start there. It started with a very strong work ethic. And like she said in the walkover on the interview, she started galloping horses at Churchill Downs 22 years ago. And so this isn't, a young trainer with an overnight success story, and they never are. So it's just the amount of work and effort that it takes to get to that point. And if you don't love horses, you'll never make it, because that's the only reason that we're there, because it's a 7-day-a-week job and it's demanding. And so if you don't get fueled from that connection that you have with every horse that you touch, you're going to run out of energy pretty quickly.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Donna. Thank you for all that you shared, and not just within this interview, but throughout your entire career as both a jockey and as an on-track racing commentator. Um, I know we're gonna miss you. I am excited to meet Andy and see how she does. I'm sure she's gonna do great. But I thank you for all that you gave during your time with NBC and beforehand. And I wish you all the best as you move forward, and that you find happiness in this next chapter of your life.
Well, thank you, Megan. And thank you for loving my beloved sport and for covering it as well. I appreciate what you do too. Thank you.
Thank you.